Hey everyone, welcome to a new edition of the Media Overview. And this time I want to show you something that I don't rarely do at times. I think the last time I did it was one of the first episodes. And that is I want to look at my comic book collection here, and most importantly I want to look at the a certain set of comic books, basically a miniseries, short miniseries, spin-off miniseries that I have. And right here you could see I have in front of you all 3 issues of the Princess Sally comic book 3-issue comic book miniseries. Now, you might ask yourself, if you never knew about this, unless you Google it, when did this happen? When did this 3-issue thing come out? Well, this 3-issue set came out about a year and a half, maybe 2 years before Endgame. You see, basically what Archie Comics had done at the time, with a lot of the characters, including, let's say, Knuckles was even put into the situation, was they gave them some spin-offs. They gave them some 3-issue, 4-issue, mainly, well, not 4, but mainly about 3-issue spin-offs. And it wasn't just with the characters either. There were certain story arcs that got started in a regular issue of the main comic back in the 90s, and because this story arc was being promoted as being so big, because the event that began in the main comic for the story arc was being touted as being so big and so epic, that the decision was made that instead of wasting precious issues of the main comic to do this, they instead decided, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take these epic stuff, we're going to take this story arc that we began in this main issue, and we're going to put it into a 3-issue set. Now, either it was a 3-issue set, or it was either a 48-page special. They would use, instead of using the minis in the main comic book, they would use basically 3 separate comics to do the miniseries in, to do the story arc in. Now you say to yourself, well, Brian, they didn't do that with Endgame. Why are they doing it with this one? Well, I'll tell you why they did it. Why they do it with everything else. Well, I'll tell you why they did it. You see, Endgame, yeah, it was a 4-issue set. It was a 4-issue miniseries. But the thing is, Endgame was basically a story within the continuity, and it wouldn't have, I don't know how they really thought about it, but I guess it really wouldn't have made sense to have Endgame, just be its own separate entity. Like, nowadays, when something happens, like say in Universe, it basically somehow affects or is related to some kind of event in the main comic. Like I've been thinking, something could happen in the 50th issue, or something could happen and begin in the 50th issue of the Universe comic, and can conclude in the 250th issue of the main comic. And that's sort of what this was at the time when they did these kind of things. Now, sometimes it wasn't just the main comic book or even the main story, like the first story in the comic. No. Instead, sometimes, most of the time, when it came to like miniseries like this, which focused on one character as the star and introduced a whole new cast of supporting characters, mainly what would happen is they would use the backup stories to basically if you will, give you an idea of what this character was going through. Sort of like a prelude, if you will. They kind of preluded by using the backup stories, by using the backup issues. They basically gave you a prelude of things to come for this character. And at the end of each main story, they would say either continue on in the next, not main story, but at the end of each issue in the backstory, they would tell you could read on and wait, the conclusion would be in the following issue. Well, with Sally here, her story basically, backup-wise, expanded from, was basically spanned, I should say, was spanned over not just issues 117 to about basically issue 21, but it also expanded from those issues into a 48-page special called Sonic in Your Face, which I do have. And I know you're thinking, oh, well, that's no surprise, right? But then after In Your Face, her backup story and adventures continued on, like I said, in the following issues of, like I say, 20 and 21 or something like that, or 19 and 20, I can't really remember. And it was through those backup stories after In Your Face in the main comic that led, and I think it was, I don't know if it was actually after issue 20 or 21, that led into this. And this was a very intriguing story, very, very intriguing, very, very popular. Now, some people might have some difference of opinions on it, and that's okay. They have a right to that. But here was the main premise. Sally had met this guy, who right now a lot of people have a difference of opinion on, Jeffrey St. John. And basically, she, along with Jeffrey, well, mostly herself at times, was training a new cast of freedom fighters, or a new supporting cast of substitute freedom fighters, or whatever you want to call them, backup freedom fighters. And those freedom fighters, of course, some of the names may stick out to you, like Hamlin was one of them. And Penelope was another. These two characters here. Those two characters were introduced through this. And basically the premise of this was they were going through and she was training them, but she was taking them on what was known as training missions. In other words, having them help her sabotage all these different factories and warehouses that were in the vicinity that she was training them in, that were run by Robotnik. But here was the twist about this, and I thought this made it very unique. Because even as a reader, I didn't catch up on this until I read the final issue. Sally, I guess you could say, had to change a vest and shoe, if you will. See, unless you didn't pay attention to it right off the bat, and believe me from experience, I didn't, there would be times throughout this miniseries that Sally's vest would change, and even her shoes would change. And they would go from being her traditional blue to purple. And it wasn't until the end that we found out that the one with the purple vest was actually an animatronic. A very well done animatronic created by Robotnik. And the reason I say very well done, because basically, with the exception of the different colored vest, no one knew the difference. No one could tell whether or not this was Sally or fake. And it wasn't until like I said, the final issue right here, this final issue here, that we found out the truth. Because basically, Jeffrey St. John, unknown to us, had basically to prove his loyalty to the kingdom, had basically told Sally about Robotnik's plan, and how Robotnik was planning on making her the first among many of the freedom fighters and those that oppose him of animatronics that would take their place. And how do we know this? Well, because, well, first of all, we kind of get a bit of a hint. We kind of get thrown off a little bit because at the end of one issue, we see Jeffrey, telling Sally telling one of the Sallys laying in a tube, soon, love, soon. So, anyway, long story short, Sally, the Sally we know, the blue-vested one, kind of makes it look like, and Robotnik, you'd think Robotnik, who created the animatronic, would notice the difference, doesn't even know that this is the real Sally. Sally makes it look like she's the animatronic, and that she's sided with and that she's really on Robotnik's side. And that is until the animatronic until they try to roboticize the animatronic, and by doing so, it blows up the roboticizer, and that's when Sally reveals the plans, and Jeffrey kind of reveals that, hey, I was in on it the whole time. I'm a leader of the secret rebellion or the underground service or whatever you want to call it. But anyway, overall, this was actually a very unique miniseries because it expanded, believe it or not, on as many people look at it, as a non-game character. It showed that even a non-game character like Sally could hold her own issue, can hold her own comic book series. Yes, they did one on Tails. Yes, they initially started the Knuckles comic book series with a few miniseries. No doubt about that. But this just proved that she could basically hold an entire series on her own, despite how people feel about her. So that was pretty cool. And I think this was also maybe at the time, just my opinion, because you notice she has her own little design, like Sonic has his and Knuckles has his. I think this was at a time to kind of try to establish her as possibly a candidate to be in the video games and maybe have her own video game as well. That's just my opinion. Because they even continued it on, this logo, this look, right here, when she guest starred in the Knuckles comic issue 29. So, overall, the Princess Sally miniseries is definitely a good series, and you definitely should check it out down the line. Now I think there's a rumor going around that they might be considering putting this out as one of the new graphic novels down the line. So that might be pretty cool, get it as one book. But if that doesn't happen, I suggest you try to see if they have it available at Archie Comics in a 3-issue set, or go to sites like maybe milehighcomics.com and order it there, or thingsfromanotherworld.com and try to order it there. So overall, I highly recommend you guys getting this. And that's all I'm going to say on this edition of the Media Overview, the M.O.V. Talking about the Princess Sally miniseries, 3-issue miniseries. Comment down below, video response if you like, and I'll talk to you all later.